Welcome back to the second series on our study of the Gospel of John. If you've missed the first time, you need please go back and may want to reread the series on we studied so we can put all this together. As I told you at that time, we're going to do a series of studies on the uniqueness of the Gospel of John. And if you'd like to have a copy of this, then you can contact us and we'll send you a paper copy to go along with the recorded copy you're listening to now. But these lessons are designed for us to learn more about God's Word. My name is Ron Lumpkins, and I'm the author of the series on our online Bible study for the Gospel of John. As I said earlier, the material is taken from a master's thesis that I wrote several years ago, and I've now adapted this into a series we can use for Bible studies. I've used this in classes at Marshall Bible School for several years. I've also used an adult class before I attend church. I think it's material that we can use quite easily. Now, those who watched the first series notice I'm trying to do this as much as I can on the idea of really a teaching exercise, like I'm in a classroom, and you're part of my classroom. This is the way that I like to do this. I'm a teacher. I enjoy teaching, and this is what I want us to do. Now, we stated in the first series that the gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all have at their power the ability to select certain words to describe the miracles or signs of John that are found in the Gospels, not only in John, but the Gospels as well. These words are power, wonders, works, signs. These four words can be used by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John to write their Gospels. And as mentioned in the earlier series, that John chose to refer to the miracles of Jesus as signs. And this goes back to John's purpose for his book. If you turn now to John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31, we're going to read this to let you know what John has in mind in his book. Here in verse 30 and 31, John says, "And many other signs of Christ performed, but these are written so that you might believe that Christ is the Son of God, and that believing in him you may have eternal life." So everything in the Gospel of John is built around the idea. So we said there's four different words that the Gospel writers will use: powers, wonders, works, and signs. We're going to begin today with the first of these, and that is the word power, or dunamis, is the Greek word. Now, the Greek word dunamis is the most common word used in Matthew, Mark, and Luke for the miracles. This word means strength, ability, or power. And it's the word from which we get our word dynamite. Dunamis, dynamite. Notice the close two words here. Now, the word originally referred to the power which dwelt in the messenger. And this is the way it's used in Mark chapter 5 and verse 30, when a woman with the issue of blood came up and touched Christ's garments. It says he felt power go out from him. And that was Mark's way of showing that a miracle had been performed. And Mark writes that he noticed this, and Christ got this wisdom from knowing this, because from God this power flowed out. The miracle performed in Matthew, Mark, and Luke are acts by which Jesus establishes God's reign and defeats the reign of the devil. And that's one of the ideas in these three books, that the miracles are powers used by God to establish his reign and to defeat the reign of the devil. They're acts of power which accompany the reign of God. For example, many of the miracles in the book of Mark talk about how that Christ was able to cast out demons, or demons left someone, and he able to heal the sick. And he talks about the power that Jesus had in doing this. The same thing is true in the book of Luke. In Luke chapter 4 and verse 39, for example, Luke points out that sin was cast out by Jesus. When he healed someone from the sick, he also took care of their sin as well. And so these men use the idea of a power to show Christ's ability to overcome the devil. And this was a direct attack on the devil's association with death. So in being able to raise men from the dead, Christ manifested an especially strong intervention of dunamis, or power. And Luke seems to really use this term when he talks about the miracles of Jesus as a result of the power of God, who is the source of all power and of whom all things are possible. So by choosing to use the word power, these men, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, emphasize the creative power of God and his control over creation. Keep in mind, they had 4 words to use: powers, wonders, works, or signs. And they want, it seems, to associate God's power that he had over creation also with what he had over other things in our lives as well. Now, John does not use dunamis as a term for miracles in and by itself. Now, it's maybe because John has very little to say about the establishment of the kingdom or the destruction of the devil. That was not his purpose. Now, John does talk about the kingdom, about it being established, and does talk about the power of God, but it's not something that John emphasized in his book. So as I said, John rarely uses the word power. Now, in John chapter 3 and verse 2, when Christ talks to Nicodemus, now Nicodemus comes to Jesus, and he's seeking to learn more about Jesus. And so Nicodemus comes in and says, "Rabbi, we know that you are a great teacher come from God. For no one can do these signs that you perform unless he comes from God." So this same idea then is found in healing of the blind man in John chapter 9 and verse 16. When the Jews have to admit that the blind man has been healed, they're going to say, if this man was not from God, he could do nothing. And we'll talk about that a lot more when we get into this aspect of our study. So we learn, therefore, that even though John may not use the word power for the word miracle or describe the acts of Christ as performing miracles as a power, it is something that he does, it is found there. It's just that it's not unique to John. Question time, okay? Remember, I said one of the ways that I can tell if you're really paying attention. And as far as I know, some of you right now could be searching your phone to see where your appointment is 2 days from now. Or some of you could be searching your phone for the latest email you got. And that's not why we're in class, okay? We're in this class to try to learn as much as we can about the Gospel of John and how that studying his book that we can learn to believe in Jesus as the Son of God. So I got some questions for you, okay? Check up on it. Okay, question number 1. And I'm going to call on you to answer some questions, and we know that it's hard for us to hear the answers because of the lack of microphone for all of you out in the class here. So I'm going to go back and forth with you in a sense, okay? Okay, question number 1 says, what is the most common word used by Matthew, Mark, and Luke to refer to the miracles of Jesus? That's correct. Dunamis, which means power, okay? Number 2, from what Greek word does our word dynamite come? And it comes from the Greek word dunamis. D-U-N-A-M-E-I-S. Dunamis. You know, the great thing about New Testament Greek is that it is what they call a dead language today, and so if I do not pronounce these Greek words exactly right, no one really knows how they're pronounced to begin with, okay? So I'm going to call it dunamis, okay? And we'll talk about some other words the same way. Question number 3 says, why do we think that the gospel writers chose to use the word power to describe the miracles of Jesus? We mentioned Mark chapter 5, verse 30. We mentioned Matthew chapter 13, verse 54, in which they used the word power. And we said the reason they used the word power there, what's the answer? Because they wanted to show the power of Jesus over the devil and the power of Jesus over the kingdom and its eventual establishment of the kingdom. So use the word power, okay? Number 4, how is the word used in Matthew chapter 13 and verse 54? And this is when the people of Nazareth asked Jesus to perform a power. So we're not going to believe that you can use some kind of mighty power, and tries to refuse to do so. Okay, number 5. Name two reasons why Matthew, Mark, and Luke seem to use the word power for the miracles. We already talked about that because they point to the power of God over the devil and to the establishment of the kingdom, okay? Number 6, it says, give an example of a miracle that is referred to by Jesus as a power. When John the Baptizer, in Matthew chapter 11, sends word by his disciples to see if Christ is the Son of God, he asked him, he says, I've heard about the deeds or works of you, and are you the one who's to be the Messiah? So he uses the word power there. I'm talking about what Christ had done. Then, of course, the other time we use that is when we find that Luke says, woe to you, Bethsaida and Tyre, if the mighty deeds have been done in you, then these places would have been returned back to God immediately. Okay, question number 7 says, why do we think the gospel writers chose the word power to describe this event? It's because the emphasis they had on the creative power of God. Okay, question number 8 says, list some reasons why John may have chosen not to describe the miracles as powers. Everybody think about it, okay? Back in the back, okay? Yes, okay, yeah, that's right. John does not say much about the establishment of the kingdom. That's one answer, okay? There's also a second answer. Okay, so we know the second answer to this question of why did John choose not to describe the miracles as powers. And that goes back to the fact that this is not one of the themes in John's gospel. He did not talk a lot about the reign of Satan and the establishment of the church. It was not what John is describing in his gospel, okay? All right, question number 9 says, what is the connection that John makes between the signs or miracles that he uses with the idea of the miracles being powers? Everybody remember? We talked about Nicodemus. And what did Nicodemus do? We find in John chapter 3 and verse 2, Nicodemus says that no one can do these signs unless God is with him. He's talking about the power that comes from God. And then in John chapter 9 and verse 16, where Christ restores the sight of the blind man, we mentioned a few minutes earlier that those who might believe in the power of Jesus to heal the blind man, they said that no one could do these things unless God was with him. So this is the idea of the word power, okay? Now, a second word that is used in the Gospels for the word miracle, and one that most closely corresponds to the English word for miracle, is the word terrace or wonder. T-E-R-A-S, terrace or wonder. Now, the word wonder is very common in the Old Testament to show a miracle as something outside the usual course of events, such as in the miracles performed before Pharaoh in Exodus chapter 4. Now, if you recall, in Exodus chapter 4, Moses has gone before Pharaoh, and he is asking Pharaoh to let the people of Egypt, or let the Israelites, leave the country of Egypt and go to what's known as the Promised Land. And in order to do this, Moses performs several great things that are referred to in the book of Exodus as wonders. But that's rarely used in the New Testament. In the New Testament, the word wonder is never, now notice this, never used by itself to describe or refer to one of the miracles. In the Gospels, they never say that Christ performed a great wonder, or this was a great wonder. It is always used in connection with another word, or in combination with another word. For example, in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 24, if you want to turn there and read that, Matthew 24 and verse 24, it's talking about the signs of the end time, and Jesus states, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. So you see signs and wonders. Notice it's connected with the word sign. He does not say the word wonder by itself. Also in John chapter 4 and verse 48, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get into the healing of the man's son, Christ rebukes the people for their desire to see signs and wonders when he heals a man's son. He says, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. And Christ even actually directs this toward the man. Now, the man has come to ask Christ to heal his son and to come to his house in order to do that. And Christ says, unless you see signs and wonders, then you're not going to believe, and that's not the reason I perform miracles, okay? They were not performed merely to amaze the people. In fact, one translation says that they were not done to bedazzle or dazzle the people. They're not going to be dazzled by the miracles, okay? So he refuses to use the miracle there. Now, the gospel writers wanted their readers to see the true importance of the miracles. They were not just sensational or exciting events. They were indicators of the power and purpose of Jesus. There's a difference there. Now, we have many people today that go around sometimes and claim to have the power to perform miracles. Now, if you'll notice very carefully, usually back behind this idea of performing the miracle is that's also done to amaze the people or to get the people to believe that there's some great person. And then they turn around, you notice on TV, they turn around and say, unless I can continue doing this work, it costs money to have this program on the air. So please send in your money. Got a funny story to tell you here. Several years ago, one of my friends who worked at one of the local radio stations a long time ago, there was this person would get on the radio station and he was always asking for money. And one day the producer said, you're not asked for money anymore on air. So the next time the man got up, he finished his lesson, his sermon he called it, and he said, friends, please continue to send in those cards and those letters, especially those letters, because they can contain things that you cannot put into a card. Notice what my friend smiled and said, I got you. Okay, so the miracles now are not performed just for wonders. Set of questions. Got to make sure you're paying attention. I noticed someone back there in the back nodding off a few minutes ago. Then stay awake, okay? All right, number one, what does the Greek word teres mean? Correct. It means wonder, okay? Very good, okay? Stand awake. Number two, which word can be used to describe the miracles are never used in the New Testament by itself? And that's the word wonder. Used in the Old Testament, but not in the New Testament. All right, question number three. I got to slow down so you can write your answers down, okay, for those who choose to write down the answers. Number three says, list some miracles that is described as wonders. Exodus chapter 4, almost all the things that Moses did there to amaze, since I notice why I use the word amaze there, but all the miracles that Moses used to persuade or to attempt to persuade the Pharaoh to let the children of Israel go, referred to as a wonder, okay? We also find in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 24 that Christ says, unless you see signs and wonders about the end time, you're not going to believe. And I'm not going to do that. Okay, give you time to write it down. Everybody got it? Good, okay? Number 4, since the writers never used the word wonder by itself, what does this suggest about the purpose of miracles by Jesus? Think about that now. Why would Christ perform miracles if they were not to be a wonder? Answer, correct. They were not designed to amaze the people or to put them in an avenue where they thought Christ was doing some great work, great wonder. Okay? Number 5. In what way did John use the word wonder for the miracles? Well, John really only used it one time. And in John chapter 4 and verse 48, he uses the word wonder there to rebuke the people for wanting to see a sign or miracle. The Messenger, it's one of the translations, says that Jesus did not perform signs to dazzle the people. That was not his reason, okay? Okay, question number 5, and the last question on this series about the word wonder. It says, what other word for miracles does John always use in reference to the wonders performed by Jesus? And that's going to be our all-important word. What is it? Correct. It's the word sign, okay? Very good, okay. Some of y'all are really paying attention. I appreciate that, okay? All right, now a third word, which is often used with the specialized meaning of miracle, is the word ergon, E-R-G-O-N. Now, for those of you who are involved in scientific measurement or involved in maybe energy, use the word erg, E-R-G, for a measure of work or unit of work. And that comes from the idea of ergon, okay, or work, okay? Now, this is the only use. Matthew chapter 11, verses 2 and 3 talks about the word works. When John hears of he says, the works of Jesus, he sends disciples to ask whether he was the one to come. And Christ replied by listing several of the miracles he had performed. And this is the only time that the word work is used in the book of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, really to describe the miracles of Jesus, with the exception of Luke chapter 24 and verse 19. So I'd like to take your Bible and read Luke chapter 24 and verse 19. Now, to summarize what he just read, we notice that in this verse, Jesus meets Cleophas and his friends on their way to Emmaus after the resurrection of Jesus. Now, they don't realize who Christ is, it says. He's walking along with them, and they describe Jesus as a man who is a prophet, mighty in deed or work. King James Version uses the word work there, and before God and the people. The word work, however, appears many times in the Gospel of John. John seems to enjoy the word work along with the word sign, okay? John, for example, uses the word work in reference to the miracles as God's saving acts which are performed through Jesus. Notice, saving acts performed through Jesus. In John chapter 5 and verse 20, for example, John writes, "For the Father loves the Son and shows him all that he himself is doing. And greater works than these will be shown him, so that you may be marvel." Now the same is true in John chapter 5 and verse 36, and John chapter 7 verse 3. We can list several scriptures. If you want to take your time later in your own private study, look these up, you can do so. I'm not going to take the time right now. But these statements refer to individual works done by Jesus, which as miracles bear witness to him and to the salvation which he brings. They also point out the complete unity between the activity of Jesus and that of his Father. And it's very important. For example, in John chapter 10 and verse 25, Christ states, "I did tell you, and you don't believe. The works that I do in my Father's name truly testify about me." Let me repeat that again, okay? In John chapter 10, verse 25, Jesus says, "I did tell you, and you didn't believe. The works that I do in my Father's name testify about me." Okay? In fact, the union between Jesus and the Father is so close in the works of his ministry that the Father, let me put it together, that the Father, excuse me here, hang on, sorry about that, that the Father himself may be said in reference to perform Jesus' works. John chapter 14 and verse 19, it talks about, God and Jesus And it's almost like God is performing the work through there between Jesus. But not only the miracles of Jesus works, his words are also said to be works. So the miracles are called works, and his words are called works. In John chapter 14, verse 10, he says, the words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority, but the Father who dwells in me does his works. Notice it's the Father who dwells in me does his works. Now this suggests, I believe, that the concept of work is much broader than that of miracle. For Jesus can be sum up his whole ministry as a work. And he does so. In John chapter 17 and verse 4, we find John writing there and talking about Jesus. In fact, it's a statement of Jesus. He says, I glorified you on earth, having accomplished the work that you gave me to do. So in a sense, we find Christ here talking to his Father, and he says, I glorified you on earth, having accomplished the work that you gave me to do. So according to John, the miracles of Jesus serve to make visible both the character and the power of God, and at the same time point out that in Jesus, God is active in a unique way. Let me repeat that for you again, okay? According to John, the miracles or works of Jesus serve to make visible both the character and the power of Jesus. At the same time, notice this, point out that in Jesus, God is active in a unique way. Now, God is not here on the earth, but in a sense, he is. He is active in Jesus. Everything that Christ does, he does on behalf of his Father. Okay, question time. Okay, I like my questions, okay? Hope you do too. And I'm going to slow down and try to give you time to write in the answers, okay? Question number 1. It says, what does the word ergon mean? Back in the back. Yes, it means works, okay? Ergon, works, okay? Number 2. How do we use the word work today? And we said as a unit of or a measure of work. And we got some scientists here in the audience, I'm sure, in the classroom, and some of you may specialize in the idea of energy and use the word erg as a unit of work. Okay, question 3. It says, list the only times the word work is used to describe the miracles in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And we said that they rarely use the word work, okay? So listen very carefully. He says, when John is asking Jesus, he's in prison, and he sends word by his disciples, go and ask Jesus if he is the Messiah, if he is the one who is to come, the one I've talked about. Okay? So that's when Matthew, Mark, and Luke use the word work. Number 4, how does John use the word work? Well, in John chapter 5, and John chapter 9, and John chapter 10, and I can list several other verses there, John always uses the word work to describe God's saving acts which are performed through Jesus. God's saving acts, now write this down, God's saving acts which he performs through Jesus. Okay, question 5. Question 5 now. It says, list 3 reasons why it seems that John uses the word work. 3 reasons. Be thinking, okay? I'm going to call on you. Okay, here in the front row. Can you tell me? What's one reason? Okay, correct. Number 1, write this down, to describe the miracles. They use the word work, okay? Number 2, his words are said to be works. Okay, very good. Okay, somebody paid attention. Great, okay? Anyone know answer number 3? Back, okay, got your hand, okay? Listen. What did you say? Yes. Christ's whole ministry was a work. to John, everything that Christ did was a work. Okay? Then lastly, question number 6, and the last question for today. Our time is about up, and I promise not to keep you more than 25 minutes, something close to that. So question number 6, how do the miracles show the closest between Jesus and God? When John chapter 14 and verse 10 and John chapter 17 and verse 4, they are used to show or make visible God and the character of Jesus and the power of Jesus. God is said to be living in Jesus, and God is active in a unique way through Jesus. Okay, our time is up for today. Hope you'll be listening to our next lesson in the series. Lesson 3 is coming up, and you can tune in as soon as anytime you'd like to. It's available. And again, if you'd like to have a handwritten copy or a printed copy of the lesson, and not just one you can download, if you want a printed copy, please consult us, and we'll get a copy to you, okay? Have a good day.